Welcome to Changed, the podcast that's all about the stories that shape us, the moments that move us, and the growth that keeps us evolving. I'm your host, Megan Galloway, and each week we'll dive into powerful stories of transformation. Because the truth is, change is constant, and it's what we do with it that defines who we are. So whether it's a major life shift or the subtle everyday changes that lead us to something bigger, this podcast is here to inspire, challenge, and celebrate the journey of becoming. Welcome back to a podcast where we talk all about moments that truly change and define our lives. This is all about storytelling and hearing more about those real moments with real conversations with real people. And today I have an amazing guest on. I have the incredible Dr. Shonna Waters. I have been lucky to cross paths with her multiple times over the last year or so, and she is just an absolute treat to learn from. She has had an incredible career, an incredible life. She is an award-winning organizational psychologist and executive. She has a proven track record with startups, Fortune 500 companies. She's done amazing research at organizations like Better Up and SHRM, and spearheaded these amazing transformational initiatives inside of HR research. She just has an amazing wealth of knowledge. She has published books, which would be amazing to check out. 2 books, one that's called The Practical Guide to HR Analytics, another one called The Coaching Shift. And she is an avid worker-outer, fitness person like myself. She loves throwing around some kettlebells, going for some runs. We bonded over our running as well. Just an incredible human being. Shauna, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh, it's such a treat, Megan. I have been so inspired by you and everything you do in your journey. And so I'm thrilled to be in the conversation today.
Yeah, I cannot wait to talk about it. And, you and I have had conversations offline about a lot of this as well, because this is such a topic that we're both really passionate about, which is why and how humans change, what makes us the people that we are, like the whole nature versus nurture debate. And I am so excited to get some of your thoughts about how you've seen this playing out in your own life. Because I do feel like it's a bit like with the mechanic and the car in their driveway, like they've got the old jalopy in their driveway that they like needs fixing up. I feel like as organizational psychologists, sometimes we're so driven to like study other people's behaviors. We feel obligated to do the same things for ourselves as well, but it's a lot harder when it's like your own like experiences and your own psyche that you're trying to analyze, right?
Absolutely. Yes. I find for myself, I have to use an army of people to help me actually reflect on my own. We actually have a group of women who I am lucky to have in community. And we joke about like, you can't see your own booty. And so you need to have people around you to help you see it and help you see these patterns in yourself.
Yeah, I love that. We all have blind spots. That's just the reality of life. I love that. And booties. We all have
And
those too.
those
So,
two. Yeah.
right. Yeah. Okay. So, first question, like we're just going to start super light. What has been a defining moment in your life that has completely changed who you are as a person?
Yeah. That is such a big question. And I love this focus on these moments. I actually worked with a story coach who had me journal moments for I think it was a 2-week period or 3-week period. And it was a really interesting process of thinking about my life in moments and what really matters. What comes up for me is, of course, the first one is like the moment I became a mother. I think is probably on top of a lot of people's lists. But if we get generous with how we think about moments, a big transition point in my life was when I went through coach training.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more about why you feel like that was so transformative for you as a person.
Well, I went through the Georgetown University coach training program. And I think for me, it was a lot of things. Like part of it was, as someone who had already at that point in my career been a psychologist for 15 years or something, it was a very different lens on everything I had studied up until that point in my experience, and put it all into this bow and gave me this opportunity to integrate and reflect and apply it all in a new way that was very impactful for me. But the other part was, because in coaching, you are the instrument of change, you are the tool yourself. The process of learning how to coach others is really applying it first to yourself. There's actually someone in my circle who did their dissertation on going through coach training as a transformational experience in and of
Wow.
itself. Yeah. And that was definitely true with my experience. I think I became so much more attuned to the ways I was in a prison of my own making, and just little ways that just simply, using very simple tools in psychology that I had known for at least 15 years would change my whole life, the relationships with people around me, my ability to be in service of others. It impacted how I approached my work, how I approached my parenting. I joke sometimes that it was like me as mom before coaching and then after coaching. I think it would be hard for me to identify a part of my life that it didn't impact.
That's incredible. And I'm curious to hear as well. So, when you think about coaching and like learning these different practices and you're applying them to yourself, is there something in particular that you feel like resonated the most with you through that experience that was like, okay, I've never thought about coaching myself in this way, but now that I do this thing, it has changed everything for me?
Yes, there's probably three things that I think for me were real game changers and things that I've tried to, continue my learning in and bring forward to others in how I work with them. One is clear communication. So when I teach coaching skills to other, I often share the story about how that impacted my marriage. I was in this habit of, I was doing this really long commute from Maryland to Virginia every day, back and forth, sitting in a lot of traffic. I would get home at the end of the day and be exhausted and stressed out from bumper to bumper traffic, and walk in the house. And, we had two very young children at the time, and I'd walk in and it was the typical, everybody has this who's listening, like the open the door and there's just shoes and socks, chaos everywhere. And I would get into the house, and that would be the first thing that would hit me. And it just set everything on this like trajectory where I'm like getting short with my husband, or I'm not as patient with my children as I would want to be, and all these things. And there was a book that we reviewed called Language and the Pursuit of Happiness by Chalmers Brothers. And it talks about clear communication and the art of a clear request. And it suddenly hit me that I had never made a clear request about, just naming what I was experiencing when I was coming in, the impact that it was having on me and our family dynamic, and then like what I needed. Like, what did I need to be different? So that day I practiced it when I got home, and that night my husband stayed up and cleared up the whole like entryway of the house. And every day I would start to come home and it would be different. And I was like, wow, I just had to ask. So like that was one. Second would be using my body. So there's another book that we went over during class that was by Richard Strozzi that talks about, the intelligent decision that we make to separate our head from our bodies, and our bodies then become just a transportation device for our head. But there's so much data and wisdom and all of that we get from our bodies. And so by working to reconnect those things, we can make our decisions, we can live in our own integrity and by our values and things like that much more strongly. So I use the body a lot. And then the third is inserting the pause. So how do we move from reacting to responding? So a lot of that is about learning to pause and then doing reframes for yourself, cognitive reframing. Very, very easy, very quick tool that, is a ton of research around it to support it, and it can apply to anything. So really just like, how is this serving me? Like, how do I want to respond? Being able to create the pause to give yourself the space to do that.
Hmm. Cognitive reframing. I love this concept. For someone that's listening that's maybe never heard of this before, what is cognitive reframing if you were like explaining it to someone at the grocery store?
Absolutely. So I think of it as pause, name, reframe, right? So an example I use a lot in my day-to-day work. So I'm often doing public speaking. And I think we know the research on people would rather die than than speak in public, right? So most of us get really anxious when we know we have to do that. So an example of what reframing is and what it looks like is before I speak, if I'm feeling myself get those butterflies, I pause, I name like nerves, or it might be heart rate or something like that. And I say, instead of saying like, wow, I feel really nervous, I say, wow, I must be really excited to share or connect with the audience today. And like, even just that, it changes the story that you're telling about your experience in a way that actually can change your behavior and you know, how you're experiencing it yourself. So that's huge. It also really works in parking lots and traffic when somebody cuts you off, or, anything where it's like, instead of being like, who do they think they are? Like, oh, they must be in a hurry. Or I wonder if there's an emergency. Like, just, these little cognitive tools, that's what reframing is.
That's amazing. It reminds me a lot of Dr. Susan David's research as well around like using those moments of kind of like zooming out to look at our data or our emotion as data points to tell us, okay, my body is experiencing nerves. What is this telling me about what I'm experiencing right now? And what is important to me about how I'm delivering this message? And is it even about me, or is it about the people sitting in the audience? And like being able to think about things from a little bit more of a zoomed out lens and getting more perspective is incredibly
Absolutely.
helpful. But it takes so much intention to do that. You've gone through this amazing transformative experience. You have these 3 new tools, plus others, I'm sure, that you're using. Why do you think those have stuck around for you?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think some of why they have stuck for me is that they're easy, they're broadly applicable, and they're effective. I think when we think about what makes people motivated to continue to do something, some of it is you have to feel confident that you can do it and it will be effective. And that belief that it will be effective is increased when you get positive feedback on it, right? So when I do a talk and I find that like, oh, that reframe helped me like do the release valve, and I showed up a little bit more grounded, a little more centered, I had a more positive experience, that makes me want to do it again. So I think it's that reinforcement loop of behavior change. And then I think for me, just really making sure that I am pausing to reflect on what's working and what's not. And so for those things, like, because they're easy, they work, and I can apply them to anything in life, it's like those tools that just kind of stick.
Yeah. Well, and if I go back to your first example as well, when you were talking about like coming home after this long commute and there's a disaster in the entryway, which so relatable. My kids are 4 and 7. Like, I feel like as soon as you clean something up, there is like another disaster just like that has appeared somehow miraculously in another room. I think that one of the things that's really interesting about what you were saying there is like you didn't even know that you could ask for that type of thing. Like it never even occurred to you. One of the things that I think is really interesting about who we are as humans and having so much on our plates, especially as moms or parents in today's society, but I think particularly moms, is that sometimes I feel like it's even hard to know what it is I need or want in that moment. So tell me a little bit more about how you've used that like pause and intention to even figure out what it is you want or need to take care of who you are as a person.
Yes. So that is another thing that for me was a developmental edge, right? I think there's a lot of socialization and conditioning over being a people pleaser, over prioritizing others' needs over your own. At one point, actually, one of my coaches was doing these group coaching sessions for women around somatics, which is just using your body as a tool. And I was really amazed to hear, particularly for moms, as you're saying, Megan, that in the motherhood process, I mean, there's a lot that's uncomfortable. The whole carrying a child, birthing a child, nourishing a child, all of that puts a lot of demands on our body. And there's a lot of shame for, even complaining about that process because it is so beautiful and important and joyful and things like that. And so we kind of shut off, a lot of like what our needs are, and hearing other moms talk about that and how disconnected they had become. So a lot of the work that I did with that coach, both in the group setting and then one-on-one, was how to get back in touch with what my needs are. And so taking that time, and sometimes it's in the moment and sometimes it's at a later point or reflection, to say, what's happening with me right now? Like, where am I feeling? What is that indicating? And, what is it that I really need and want right now, in a way that even gives me the ingredients to be able to make a request or an ask or do something. My 4.5-year-old is going through a high emotional regulation period. And we had set up a chair for her by the window so that when she's triggered, she can sit there, and she has, the Love Every calming circle where she's, using that to help her breathe in and out. Adults need that too. And so for me, that's often taking a walk outside, as you and I talked about. We both love nature, but I think that can be anything, just to give yourself the space to have that deeper conversation.
Honestly, until you said that, I don't think that I realized how much like, reflecting back on my own experience and journey into motherhood. I think you're right that you just detach from your body at a certain point because you feel like there's so much physical demand as part of that experience of taking care of children and healing and nourishing and all of those things that you're doing as part of like that journey into motherhood. And to your point about like no one's really talking about that. And so you just kind of like turn it off because you don't want to complain and you want to see the positive sides of it because they are beautiful. And for me personally, and you and I've talked about this previously as well, I feel like I have come into my strength as a woman so much more post that experience, but mainly I think because I had never been so detached from my body and then rediscovered myself again, like I have through strength training and training for half marathons and running and doing things that feel really hard physically, but that have made me feel more empowered as a human being inside of my body and inside of my mental health, and as a result too. So I think that's super interesting.
Well, and I love that you're making those connections, because I actually, when you talk about these moments of transformation, and I said almost like dismissively, becoming a mother is one, but I go back to that moment of strength and surprise in, myself, my own capacity, the human capacity to create life and go through like kind of pretty mind-blowing pain, right? And right at that moment when you think you can't, you push through and you're able to do it, and it opens up this whole new world of possibility for what you're capable of. That I think that is such a important ingredient in transformation, is that like glimmer of what's possible. Like whether it's for you as an individual or another person or for the world, it's like we have to have that like innate belief that there's more or different. And I think that, bringing a life into the world, and also that we are capable of doing that, is a pretty high on the list for something that can create possibility.
Yeah, it's like the secret ingredient of hope. Like if you can see that one little thing that shows you that something could be different, especially when you're having a really hard time, and you can kind of futurist your way through whatever the hard things are by just like seeing the future and knowing that there has got to be something better on the other side. That's motivational to leave something else behind when you think there's a dream of something else much bigger.
Absolutely. And I think there's been so much more attention in recent years on purpose and meaning, and a leader's opportunity to connect people to purpose and meaning. And, that helps us tap into these energy stores that, we might not otherwise have access to. And for me, that's the why behind it. It's that glimmer in the future that it's like, oh, I can see it. I can find my way there.
Why do you think that sometimes as humans we can see that and other times we can't?
Oh, well, I think that it's easy to get stuck in the day-to-day and in the tactical, monotony, the to-do list, all of that, where we end up looking down instead of up and out. You and I were chatting a little bit as we were preparing for this about our individual writing processes and things like that. And I described what for me has been this important rhythm or oscillation between focus and expansion. And I think that works no matter what you're talking about, whether it's like powering through a project and having to stop and really reflect on how is this going, doing an after action review, refocusing on the goal or the metrics. Like there's so many applications to this in our life. I think this is why things like New Year's resolutions, even though most of them don't stick, that it's such a valuable moment to say, wait, how am I doing against where I want to be, and take that intentional pause to zoom out. And that's just because if we're on the ground, working through the nitty gritty all the time, it's just we lose perspective. And one of the most powerful things for getting unstuck is a perspective change, whether that's time, person, position. As a coach, I know you deal with this too. It's somebody's stuck in a question, ask them how they'll feel 6 months from now. My coach did that with me yesterday and it was really effective. So I think it's really just we lose sight because we're overstimulated by everything in the minutia.
Yeah, we're stuck in focus all the time. And there are moments of opportunity for that expansiveness and the expansive thought, like to your point about New Year's resolutions, where I always do vision boarding every year,
I
like
love
the traditional, cut out magazine parts and put it onto a vision board. And I think that it's like what we were talking about earlier. A lot of times we're not even checking in with ourselves to think, what do we need? What do we want? How do we want our life to look? What do we want to change? And creating those catalysts for that expansiveness then empowers our focus space to be so much more not just impactful and making progress, but also fulfilling because we're moving in a direction that we feel excited about, that we feel like is the right place for us to be in. And it's part of the ingredients to getting off of that feeling of being on a hamster wheel all of the time of sitting in traffic and coming home and seeing the shoes by the doorway every day. And you feel like you're in this constant stuck cycle. And to break it, you need that reframe. You need that change of pace. And I really do believe one of the only ways you can get that is to zoom out. And I think that part of the reason why when we go through big life transformations, or in particular, I think when we lose someone and we go through a period of grief, it forces us into this place of reflection, of zooming out to think about how do I want my life to look? And life is short. And how do I want to make change? And so I wonder if that's one of the things that triggers more lasting long-term change, because some of these big events that happen in our lives create that moment of reflection that's forced. But how could we recreate that for ourselves when we really need it without having hard things happen in our life? It's a hard thing to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, when I work with organizations on change, I talk about change as energy
Mm.
because inertia is powerful because it's easier, right? It takes less energy to keep doing the same thing. You're in a groove, you're in a pattern, you know how to do it. It's been reinforced over time. You've reached automaticity on something. And so it just takes less energy to keep doing the same thing. So what motivates us to do something different and expend more energy to get that initial boost, and then in particular, like maintain momentum over time to sustain change. And it's usually some kind of disequilibrium. So something has to get shaken up and put into the blender. Moments of trauma or events like deaths, birth, things like that, everything gets kind of reassessed. For, in the world of addiction, that whole notion of hitting rock bottom, that's why that's a really important moment. And you almost have to force it to get to change. So I think that there is this kind of events of significance that can have us in this state of unknowing and searching that do lend themselves well to reflection, to change, to being willing to expend the energy to do something different. And frankly, I think the world writ large is in that right now. I think AI, for example, is one of these really transformative events for the world where like that's causing everything to be up for reinvention, because we don't know what things are going to look like, but we know there's a lot of like pressure in the system right now for things aren't working. And I think that as an opportunity to reflect on possibility. And so we're paying attention to these things, and we can set an intention about, do we want to just let it evolve by ourselves, or do we want to get really clear and intentional about like what we can create or want to create going forward. So
I love that. Yeah, because I think that intention is what then gives us more control over what we actually want in our lives and how we can be a little bit more in the driver's seat, or at least have the illusion of being in the driver's seat, no less. But all right, so one last question for you before we get to the speed round. You've gone through a lot of transformation and change in your own life, and I know you have that growth mindset and are continuing to change. What's one thing you hope never changes about who you are as a human being?
I care a lot about people, and I have a real passion for seeing the possibilities in others and helping them see it and identify that. I get such joy out of that I would hate to lose that. I never want to get like hardened around that. So there's like a little bit of optimism and almost naivete sometimes that I hope to retain in my very late years.
That's beautiful. And I will say that has been my experience with you so far, is ever since I've gotten to know you, it's felt like you've just wrapped me in a big metaphorical hug and have helped me along in so many different ways. And I feel that deeply from you. So I appreciate that.
Well, you're definitely a person where all the potential and impact is very easy to see. I don't have to look very hard.
Well, thank you for that. All right. Well, let's speed round. What is one thing that you used to hate, but now you love?
Honestly, all the soft stuff in psychology, people, organizations. I used to turn people into numbers, and now I love to talk to them.
I love that. You've gotten squishy, and that's amazing. What's one book or movie that's changed your perspective?
Awareness.
Mm,
The book, highly recommend.
amazing. If you could instantly master any skill or habit, like we get off this call and you can just do it, what would it be?
I wish that I was like a better operator. Like, I want everything automated. I am not good at making that happen. I have so much admiration for all the operators out there and would love to just wake up and love it and rock at it.
I deeply, deeply relate to that. Yes, I like that. What's one thing you wish you could change about our world?
I wish we just had a better sense of how we're making it all up. We're making it all
Mm,
up, and there's so much both power and responsibility in that. So the notion of constructed reality, and that, none of us have privileged access to the truth. And so I think, for me, that principle creates a pathway for a lot more like empathy and compassion.
I think that that idea of like driving more empathy in whichever way we end up getting there. That seems to be quite a trend in these conversations so far, is that if the world could just have just a tiny bit more of that, of people truly seeing each other, that things would change a bit.
Yeah, exactly. I think at the end of the day, we all just have a deep, deep need to be seen and heard. When we do that, everything else gets a lot easier.
It really does. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today. Thank you for diving into all things. I love that we ended up like centering around a bit of motherhood today as well, because I do think that that is such an important part of this conversation as well, especially for amazing achiever moms who want to make an impact in the world of work too. Like both of those things combined, of like going through this transformative period and that part of our lives, plus going through transformative periods in the career part of our lives, like they're all together in one. And I'm so glad that we ended up diving into that a little bit today.
Me too. Thank you so much, Megan. I had great reflections and insights myself. So like all the conversations I have with you. So I appreciate an extra dose of that today. And I'm so glad you're doing the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited too. So, people want to hear more about your work or find more information about your books. Where is the best place to get in contact with you or learn more?
Well, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn. Again, it's Shonna Waters. I also have two websites you can navigate to. One is fractionalinsights.ai. The other one is drshawnawaters.com.
Amazing. Thank you again so much for being here, and can't wait for the next conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today on Changed. I hope this story sparks something in you. Maybe a reminder of your own growth or a new perspective on where you're headed. Remember, change doesn't have to be something that you're scared of. It's an opportunity to become more of who we're meant to be. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your story is unfolding and we can't wait to see where it takes you. Until next time.